welcome back. And I'm sure a lot of you, wait one second, this is supposed to play at the end, but I'm sure a lot of you are probably wondering why there aren't as many live streams and etc. I'll tell you what, sometimes I miss doing more videos and live streams, but the fact is, it is a little bit more rewarding in terms of being able to get my thoughts in order to do stuff in writing. It's been a little bit of a challenge to get some of my stuff published. And as some of you might know, if you follow the Hard Bastard channel, I actually had an article published by the Federalist not long ago. And I thought of it as like the best accomplishment that I've had so far. But it's still a ways to go to getting the story that I'm talking about out and in the minds of the general public. And of course, there's so much clutter right now with the general attention span of America, of the world. There's lots of things that you could say are higher priority than the stuff that people like me on Bold Like a Leopard are working on. Of course, there's the Hong Kong protests, which I'll tell you what, there are many important stories that I think I'd like to comment on, but I don't think I lend much of a new important part of the discussion. It's almost like I'd just be bringing sand to the beach. And obviously there's some that I think are too fun or too interesting not to comment on. So with that in mind, I'll start with the Amazon. I am what you could say is a climate change agnostic. So I do believe that there are certainly pretty heavy issues that are being inflicted on the environment by the continued use of fossil fuels, but a lot of it's been mitigated over the past 30 to 40 years by better combustion technology. And this is something I learned about in my own professional training. So am I one of these people who says, well, we should just keep using oil and gas until, the world comes to an end? No, I think we should invest in alternative technologies. One of the alternative technologies is nuclear power, which a lot of the environmentalists like to demonize, but it's actually very practical either to use conventional nuclear reactors or move to the thorium reactors, which are what are being used over in Europe. And we're not going to dwell on this very long. The other issue that's wrong with the environmental movement is that it's become the climate change movement, meaning that there are certain aspects of climate change that we're just going to have to acknowledge that human beings can't reverse it. These are trends that would be happening whether or not we were using fossil fuels or not. And therefore, this green movement is just a huge scam. And I include the vast majority of environmental organizations in this, including the World Wildlife Fund and the Sierra Club, and of course 350.org. And some of these organizations I've done actual research on recently. If you see my piece in the Federalist, which we're not going to dwell on that, you're going to see a pattern where, simply put, they're not looking to actually present a solution. They're looking to hype the doomsday scenario, which is a climate Armageddon. So we're really talking about a crisis that is either inevitable or one that's manufactured. It's inevitable because they like to say, well, we're not going to be able to reverse any of these effects, but we can make it at least more tolerable. And this is something that you see from the beginning of the climate change movement of the late 80s up until today. And unfortunately, the media has been completely complicit in this. So we'll deal a little bit with that at the end. There's a little corollary to that climate news. I mean, look, I'll admit that for a long time, the issues with the climate change movement were not really at the top of my agenda because I didn't really care. I didn't care at all. But the more they shove it out into the public sphere through the Green New Deal and through similar organizations organizations that push the Green New Deal, things like that, the more you start to notice cracks in the facade. So there's a couple stories on that we'll get to, but let me see here. The Cubs end up losing. Yes, they did. I still have this open. Damn it. But in any case, we have Bill Kristol and Joe Walsh are trying to create this new primary challenge to Donald Trump. This is something that I briefly covered last week in an upload video, and I think I might not have uploaded it. I think I ended up scrapping it. No, there were two videos that I addressed it in, one of which I didn't end up publishing. But in any case, Dino Baydala, who's just this complete jackass, who I believe Dino Baydala does he also write for Rolling Stone? If not, maybe I'm confusing him with some. I think I might be confusing him with Matt Taibbi. But Dino Baydala is encouraging. Okay, it's the Daily Beast. He is encouraging Democrats to support Anthony Scaramucci and Joe Walsh simply with the interest of beating the Donald. That's how pathetic they are. I see we have Kozlowski here. He's a little feisty today. In any case, it says, so he says, indeed, as the saying goes, politics makes strange bedfellows. The question now is, do Democrats want to share a, quote, bed with people who have supported President Donald Trump until recently? The answer should be a resounding yes if Democrats are truly committed to making Trump a one-term president. No one is a more glaring example of a potentially strange bedfellow than Trump's former White House communications director, Anthony Scaramucci, who stood in the White House briefing room in July 2017 and declared, I love the president. I'm very loyal to the president. He even added, the president has really good karma and he's genuinely a wonderful human being. That same Scaramucci, who was fired 11 days later for sharing with a reporter a profanity-laced attack on Trump administration officials he didn't like, is now publicly slamming Trump in countless TV appearances, and in an op-ed he penned for the Washington Post last week, he called on his fellow Republicans to summon the nerve to speak out on the record against Trump. So I want people to put a pause here, okay? And remember, Anthony Scaramucci was not a Republican when he joined the Trump administration. Scaramucci was actually a lifelong Democrat. Prior to that, he was a business Democrat, but he was still a Democrat. And those people who like to constantly remind the public that Robert Mueller is a registered Republican or whatever, I'd like them to dig up Scaramucci's Republican registration, because I'm pretty sure it doesn't exist. Not that it matters, because in Washington, they're all playing for the same team. It's basically shirts versus skins. That's the way I look at the Republican and Democratic parties in many cases. Where were we? Scaramucci is not only using words to defeat Trump in 2020. A few days ago, he announced he's in the process of starting a political action committee to, quote, dismantle Trump. But Scaramucci isn't the only former Trump supporter who has turned on the president. On Sunday, former Republican Representative Joe Walsh announced he was formally challenging Trump for the 2020 Republican nomination, telling ABC's George Stephanopoulos, we've got a guy in the White House who is unfit, completely unfit to be president, and it stuns me that nobody stepped up. So sorry if I don't have a good Chicago accent, but that's what he sounds like. I think we might actually see a little bit of what he sounds like. Yeah, there's some video over here. And I'll tell you what. I have plenty to say about Joe Walsh. The question is whether it's really worth talking about, because I would say almost no one thinks he has a real chance in hell of doing anything. Even if it was a year when Trump wasn't the overwhelming favorite to win the nomination again and probably win the presidency again, I still think he would be a horrible candidate, because he seems like just a laughing stock. Mr. Wazo is saying he has always been never Trump. You know, that's a question I was having because I don't remember, because his show plays here in the area late night. They replay his show. I think he has an afternoon drive show in Chicago, and for whatever reason, which doesn't make any sense, they replay his show over here in northern Ohio, and I live in the Cleveland area, and for whatever reason they put his show on, and it's just unrelatable. I don't know why people would want to listen to it unless you live in Chicago. And my point is that I don't remember him being very positive about Trump at all, ever. I remember him actually being quite negative against him. And there were other hosts that I would say on the same network, the Salem Radio Network, which is pretty, it's probably the most widely listened to conservative radio network in this area. Although I think Rush Limbaugh is on here too. I don't listen to him. There's only so much I can take. But in any case, Hugh Hewitt is on the same station, and he's fully swung to the Trump train, which is pretty crazy because he was one of the most ardent anti-Trump people, and I actually don't like Hugh Hewitt. So let's keep reading this. It's kind of funny seeing Obeidallah try to twist himself into pretzels in order to justify a Joe Walsh candidacy. He says, regarding Scaramucci, there has been a great deal of skepticism over his supposed anti-Trump conversion. From liberal cable news hosts to progressive listeners who called my Sirius XM show, many wonder if he can be trusted to be a true ally in the 2020 race, and I completely understand. Well, that's the whole issue here. Okay, that's what you have to really deliberate on. What Dean Obeidallah is trying to make the point is, what he's trying to say is that the world has gone so to shit. The world has so degenerated under the president that he's willing to consider Joe Walsh, this guy who literally complains about how he can't say ethnic slurs. He wants him to be an ally to the progressive cause, which isn't really why Joe Walsh is supposedly running. Supposedly, he's going to present the principled conservative viewpoint, right? So I have a capo in my hand. So, so yeah, it makes no sense. If you're running as a GOP person, supposedly the GOP is for quote unquote conservatives, right? So why would you be expecting anything from Joe Walsh? And that really is how you can see that not even progressives are buying this. They see him as an establishment puppet, which he is now, and that's as obvious as I can see. Even Obeidallah, in trying to defend this idea, it's pretty clear that he doesn't believe in it. He says, after all, in addition to praising Trump from the White House podium, Scaramucci declared his Trump for his love for Trump in 2017, and even noted in his August 11th, 2019 tweet that for the last 3 years I have fully supported this president. Scaramucci, though, has criticized the president at times, most notably Trump's response to the 2017 Charlottesville white supremacist attack. And in the case of Walsh, his record is far worse. This is a guy who trafficked in birtherism, called former President Barack Obama, quote, a Muslim, and tweeted in 2016, "Watch out, Black Lives Matter punks, real America is coming after you." Walsh has since indicated his remorse, saying that the beauty of what President Trump has done is he's made me reflect on some of the things I've said in the past. I had strong policy agreements with Barack Obama, and too often I've let those policy disagreements get personal. No, that is not a policy disagreement. When you call somebody a Muslim, that is a personal, jibe. Okay? That's a jab at his personal religious identity. Now, I get it. I certainly am critical of Islam. But if I call somebody something as an insult, which is what he really meant there, that's personal. That has nothing to do with policy. So, yeah, I've been calling him Joke Walsh. You can see in the title, in fact. So if you guys want to help a brother out, tweet this out and get Joke Walsh trending. It would help a lot because this channel is kind of getting sandbagged. But by the way, I'm actually, For those of you that are curious, if you follow me on Twitter, there's a couple people who follow me on Twitter, which for whatever reason I've been growing on Twitter lately. But I also got suspended for a week. So I got suspended for it had to do with this. Okay, get this. Okay. I actually tweeted at somebody who claimed that Angela Rye owned Joe Walsh on CNN, that nobody owned anyone. They should go into a closet and fuck each other because those two retards are exactly what CNN deserves. And for that, that's almost verbatim what I said. And for that, I got suspended for a week on Twitter, even though I didn't mention anybody getting fucked through the eye or, America deserving some horrible attacks or something. So that's Twitter for you. That's Twitter. Although I guess, to be fair, the person that I'm alluding to, not so subtly, didn't do that on Twitter, but you get the idea. But he did defend those comments on Twitter. What else is going on? So, and in the case of Walsh, so I think I read this already. In addition, Walsh supported Trump's December 2015 call for a total and complete ban of Muslims coming into this country, tweeting, "Trump is right. Polls show most Muslims believe in Sharia law. Sharia isn't compatible with our values. Why the hell would we want them here?" On Friday, Walsh expressed remorse and apologized for saying hurtful things about Islam. Look, I've always been someone who doesn't really, but I don't really gravitate towards that debate whether there should be a total ban on Muslims or not. You could say that I've been a bit of a pussy about it because I personally have friends. Oops, I almost flagged myself. I have some friends that I've worked with in the past who are Muslim. They're not particularly devout Muslims, but I've gotten along well with them. The Muslims that I know in my life, I personally have not had very much of a problem with a couple exceptions. So I don't really believe that type of stuff about them as individuals. Obviously, as a religion, I don't agree with Islam. It's not my religion. I think that you should be allowed to criticize all religions. You should even be allowed to offend all religions. And I think that certainly Joe Walsh's comments are fair in the context of freedom of speech. So for him to apologize for this nonsense is ridiculous. It's why it's so stupid to believe that this person could ever be a challenge to win the GOP nomination, even if it wasn't Trump he was running against, because it looks like he's bending over backwards to accommodate a new set of masters. So the big question is, how should Democrats respond to the Mooches and Walshes of this surreal political world we live in? Scaramucci addressed that very point in his op-ed after admitting his errors in judgment. He made a plea for Democrats to accept people like him. To members of the so-called resistance, please leave room on the off-ramp for those willing to admit their mistakes. And Scaramucci is right, to a certain extent. Democrats should leave room for the former Trump supporters who now are joining Democrats in their quest to defeat Trump. And the reason is simple. Trump supporters probably will never listen to Democrats, but these former Trump superfans might be effective at reaching those on the right who have grown increasingly uncomfortable with Trump. Scaramucci is plugged into the financial side of the political world and might be able to entice others like him who were benefiting from Trump's tax policies and financial deregulation, but were growing disgusted with Trump's bigotry, to not support Trump in 2020. So this is what's so ridiculous. He's making the point that Scaramucci will be able to prevail upon people that he sees as immoral and completely bereft of any underlying principles to jump ship on a person that also happens to be immoral and bereft of any underlying principles by appealing to their morality. That's what his idea is, right? That's his premise. That's how retarded Dino Bedala's theory is. That you can appeal to the morality of people that you think are completely immoral. The rich, which is the way that people at the Daily Beast and on CNN relate to people on Wall Street who happen to be, they're actually the ones who are being facetious because, as we all know, they themselves are not particularly principled, and often, they bend with the wind. People on CNN, they've gone along with the so-called compassionate conservatism of the Bushes for a while. They've done stuff like that. Mr. Wazo says, doesn't Walsh owe like $177,000 in back child support? I did see one source saying that the judge had reduced his child support and maybe even, I think, waived some of it. And I believe his kids are actually grown now. So I'm not sure if that's really up-to-date information. And Walsh, a radio show host since losing re-election in 2012 and a frequent guest on cable news, could be effective in reaching rank-and-file Republicans since he speaks their language. Well, not anymore, apparently. For example, Walsh was a Tea Party Republican when the Tea Party was known for championing lower federal budget deficits. In contrast, under Trump, the deficit is exploding, expected to hit $1 trillion for the 2020 fiscal year. Walsh may be able to pick off some fellow Tea Party Republicans on that issue alone. The 2020 election likely will be a nail-biter. In other words, if Scaramucci and Walsh can peel off even a small percentage of votes for Trump, that might be just enough to defeat him, and that's something Democrats should be supporting, even if they don't fully share their beds with these men. Yeah, it sounds pretty gay. This is one of the dumbest ideas I've ever heard. I don't think that Dean Obeidallah is really convinced that this is I think that he's full of shit here. I think he's making up reasons to go along with this, and I think he'll live to regret this. It's really the height of disingenuousness when you come up and this is a guy who he goes on MSNBC too, I believe. I think I'm not sure he only goes on CNN. I think he goes on both CNN and MSNBC and engages in these rants, these moralistic rants against the Trump voter base. So who the hell is he to preach to anyone? This is from Will Chamberlain, and we're not going to read through it because it's repeating a number of the issues here that were already gone through by Obeidallah. But he said, Mr. Walsh in the mea culpa published in the New York Times on August 14th admitted on more than one occasion questioning President Obama's truthfulness about his religion. This is perhaps the understatement of the year. As of publication, Mr. Walsh has dozens of tweets about former President Obama and Islam still up on Twitter. Walsh now says that there is no place in our politics for personal attacks like that, and I regret making them. And it's hard to take Mr. Walsh's regret seriously, given that after a mere 1 week of repentance, he's on the verge of announcing his candidacy for the highest office in the land. So this was published before he started running, and here's a video of him talking with constituents.
And whoever else that Joe, look at the people, Paulson and whoever else that keep going from a big bank, then they go into Fed government, then they go back into the banks, and they just keep rotating.
I agree with you about that. That's not the problem. That's not the problem. The problem is you got to be consistent. And I don't want government meddling in the
there's a guy who wants to be president. And he sounds like this on his radio show, by the way.
Marketplace. Yeah, they move from Goldman Sachs to the White House. I understand all of that. But you got to be consistent. And it's not the private marketplace that created this mess. What created this mess is your government, which has demanded for years that everybody be in a home. And we've made it as easy as possible for people to be in homes. All the marketplace does is respond to what the government does. The government sets the rules. Don't blame banks and don't blame the marketplace for the mess we're in right now. I am tired of hearing that crap.
So don't.
I am tired of hearing that crap.
Fighting the situation, taking and throwing money out to people they know they couldn't afford it.
There are already mechanisms in place.
No,
you know what? Because this pisses me off. Too many people don't listen. There are already mechanisms in place to do that. Are they doing their job? No. But what do you want to do? You want to bombard them with more regulations, more government? Government screwed this problem up. What do you want? Well, you know what you've got?
Because
you know what you've got? You got Dodd-Frank.
The banks
You got Dodd-Frank now that's tying everybody's hands. You wanted more reform, more regulation? That's what you got. John, do you want more regulation? Is that what you want? Do you want Dodd-Frank? Is that what you want?
What did I say back at Joe's barbershop?
I need more coffee. It's so,
I think you've had too much.
it's so
Give me
freaking
decaf.
easy.
Decaf.
So easy.
Decaf.
Finish some decaf.
Joe,
Wrong stuff. Quiet for a minute.
Hang on.
Quiet for a minute.
what did I say? back
Quiet
at Joe's
for a
barbershop?
minute, or I'm going to ask you to leave. You need to listen, or I'm going to ask you to leave.
Yeah, this guy, look, I actually don't have a problem with the premise that the banking industry, the more you regulate the banking industry, in many ways you do make it more corrupt. I do think it's sort of it's an issue that you could go many ways on it. And I don't think that he really addressed the issue in a very competent manner, because he was just berating these people and trying to say, well, what do you want, Dodd-Frank? What do you want, Dodd-Frank? As a matter of fact, one of the people who has helped to undo a lot of the same provisions made through Dodd-Frank has happened to be Trump and the Republican Congress from 2017 through 2019. The last Congress, the one that just ended. So if he really had a problem with that and he thought it was a hindrance on the economy, he would probably be a huge Trump cheerleader. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I think that there's plenty of concerns that, obviously, sorry, these banks are really, they don't exactly function as real marketplace actors. They often do collude with the government in order to rig the game. Okay, I am not one of these friends of the banking industry. I think that you could make certainly a case to support more regulation of the banking industry. And then there's also cases where you could say, well, the more you regulate it, the more corrupt and incestuous it becomes. And Joe Walsh, I mean, when you look at that video, do you guys want to watch it again? Let me know in the chat, because watching this video, I have to look at him as someone who has probably he's like a fish that flopped out onto land and came along someone on the beach and said, he basically made an agreement with the fish, Joe Walsh, and he said, I'll put you in a tank and you'll live in my tank and I will keep you alive and I will make you important again. That's really what's going on here with some of these neocons, because in the past, I don't think he really was a neocon. I think he was one of these. This is the way he's been described in the press. He's been described as a bomb thrower, a flamethrower, all of these different adjectives, firebrand, blah, blah, blah. And now when he's going to go, I could have put his interview with George Stephanopoulos on, which I listened to, and frankly, he just seems so fake and disingenuous that maybe we'll do it a different time. But Joe Walsh, I think, he's clearly sold his principles completely, because now, I mean, could you see him behaving like this on national TV and the press really getting behind him and saying that he's a sane alternative to Donald Trump? He acts crazier than Donald Trump. Donald Trump, I think, is able to address people. Donald Trump is very good at using his opponents in order to give himself more strength. He does that with Nancy Pelosi. He's done it very, very capably with him. In fact, when Nancy Pelosi was called racist by members of I think it was by either members of the squad or members of their inner circle, Trump actually went in front of a gaggle of reporters and said, hey, it's unfair. Nancy Pelosi's not racist. I've known her many years. And obviously, even if he was sincere about that, you could tell that wasn't going to help Nancy Pelosi. She was probably saying as she was watching it, "Shut up, you're not helping. This is the worst thing you could do." So Joe Walsh is not the same type of person, and that's why Dino Baydala and his ilk have misplaced their hopes. They've sorely misplaced their hopes if they're going to give any trust to this cretin. The only person running right now for any position in the country that I think has any ounce of integrity right now is Tulsi. And to be honest with you, I think I would still, I would still probably vote for Donald Trump, even though I certainly see a lot of flaws in him. And this whole thing with the bump stock ban, and now there's talk of the red flag laws and possibly magazine capacities. He's walked it back a bit. The universal background checks, I think, could be coming down the pike. I don't really care about that. But, I'm not one of these people who is going to blindly clap like a barking seal at everything Donald Trump does. And certainly there's reason to be nervous. You should probably take a look. I don't think I pulled this story up. Let me see. I actually have it wandering around somewhere, but... Oh, fuck. It's from a Zero Hedge. So... the Chinese yuan is crashing right now because their market is already open over there. And is this going to be a good thing for the U.S. economy? I don't know. I don't think so. It could be just the residual effects of last week's Dow crash. But I don't know if we can actually, if we can survive a big financial crash over there, because there is a little bit of, there's a big nexus between the American and Chinese economies. I think some of you might be better at discussing this issue than I am. So I hope you guys agree that there is reason to be nervous with what's going on with the Chinese trade war. I am somebody, I never, ever, ever root for any country to go into a depression, even if it's we don't have a good relationship with China now, and they've been taking advantage of many weaknesses in the enforcement regimen in world economic forums, if you know what I'm talking about. They've been taking advantage of conditions for so long that it's like we do have to do something about China. I don't know if I'm saying because I really don't know. I don't know if what Trump is doing is going to work. So I'm not one of these people who has blind faith. Sislowski is saying fuck China. Okay. Yeah, I think, I actually read this book, and we're going to do a review on it. Mr. Wazo, if you want, I can talk a little bit about Bill Mitchell, but I'm not entirely familiar with it. But The Claws of the Dragon, I hope to do a review on it maybe sometime this week, relating to the secret police history of communist China. So I certainly have no sympathy whatsoever for the system over there, but the people there, I actually have no problem with Chinese people. Just like I hope for a better world. I don't really hope for the U.S. to get wrapped up in any long-term conflict with any country, whether it's Russia, China, North Korea. Excuse me. God willing, we'll have better relations with Iran someday. Is it going to happen soon? Probably not. I did see that there was the visit of the foreign minister to the G7. So, yeah, I think there's certainly reason to be worried about what's going on with the yuan over there, and we're going to have to really keep an eye on the markets. A lot of these news organizations are predicting a recession. Am I convinced that there's going to be a recession? No. Am I going to ignore the news about it? Also no. the big banks are insolvent again. John, are you talking about our big banks or their big banks, or are you talking about both? So Wazo said that he was going to ask, "What am I going to say anything about Bill Mitchell?" I always thought Bill Mitchell was kind of creepy, and when he went and said, "I implicitly trust Donald Trump with regards to the red flag laws and all this other garbage happening in the aftermath of the two shootings," it was not unexpected, because that's the way he reacted to the Syria airstrikes. That's the way he reacted to the second Syria airstrikes. That's the way he reacts to any news. Anything that Trump does, he's fine with. Why? Because he doesn't have any real insight to give. He's a cheerleader, and that's not the right way to relate to the news. There's obviously good things about Trump, but if you give blind faith to a leader, you deserve to be screwed if something goes wrong. We're all human beings. So that's the most I can say about him. I did see something too, a little something disturbing about him having some sort of sexual harassment case pending against him, which I'm one of these people who says due process should be the real determinant. We can't just listen and believe. But I've heard stuff about him for a while, and I've never really had a good feeling about that guy. So no, I don't like Bill Mitchell. And yes, he is a bootlicker. And if it wasn't for Trump, he'd be bootlicking somebody else who could get him ahead, because I don't really see anything unique about him. Look. So Wazo, I think I had an argument with Wazo like a year ago or something, but I'll tell you the truth. If you guys watch my show and you don't like something I'm saying, I'm fine with you saying whatever you want. I don't want to block people. I want people to sort of feel like they're just hearing stuff that is important to them. If I'm talking about stuff that's not important to you and you log off and you say, "Hey, why are you talking about boring shit?" Well, then I'm talking about stuff that doesn't interest you. It's interesting to me. It doesn't mean that I'm going to hound you and say, "Hey, you don't care about Joe Walsh, or you don't care about the Amazon or whatever, these Amazon fires that are going on right now." That I believe things like that happen every year. Doesn't make it good. It doesn't make it bad. You just have to look at the news sometimes as something that you should pay attention to, but you can't look at it as basically the equivalent of, the Ohio State-Michigan game or something. That there's always a good side or a bad side. So, yeah, I don't like Bill Mitchell. I don't. There's always been something weird about him. Fred is interested. But I mean, what do you guys think? I mean, Wazo, it doesn't seem like you're a fan of his. Do you guys any of you guys are fans of Bill Mitchell? Because I used to watch his show. He has like that weird toothy grin, and I mean, every single show is about how Trump is Mr. Wonderful. Like that guy from Shark Tank, Kevin O'Neill, I think his name was. Every year in Asia, it's just like the Amazon. Months of haze. Yeah, that's interesting, says Lowski. I don't know if I could live like that, but I think that there's ways to approach it besides descending into hysteria like some people do. And speaking of which, so we're going to come to the end here. We're going to finish because I have something to do today, which is a little bit more important. I like it that you guys are here, and I'm glad that you joined on short notice. But there's actually something going on later that I think has a little more long-term importance, which eventually you guys will probably find out about. But one last thing. Apparently, Michael Mann, one of the chief climate change people, one of the chief climate change figures, especially in the scientific community, has lost a court case in British Columbia against a climate change skeptic, where the hockey stick graph was called into question because it was alleged that the hockey stick graph was based on tampered data that had been retroactively adjusted. And Larry Gerke, sorry to say that's not it. It has more to do with the work I do on this channel. So I'm sorry to say, man. But yeah, the hockey stick graph is what happens when you say. Well, I thought there was something else down here. So if you remember, there was a graph that was being used back in the 2000s where it showed that temperature levels were roughly in the same range, and then they started to spike upward towards, I believe, the late 1990s, and really go upwards in almost an asymptotal pattern. So he apparently has refused, after suing a climate change skeptic for libel. He has sued that person. He sued him in 2011, this guy named Tim Ball, Dr. Tim Ball from British Columbia, for libel in Canadian court. And he was told, well, in order to prove your libel case, you're going to have to present the true data. And he never presented it in 8 years. In 2017, he had a motion for, I think it was a motion for adjournment, they call it. Okay, I'm not a lawyer, so don't hold me to any of this, but I read this earlier. He had a motion for adjournment, giving him a little more time, and then he never presented the data, and now the court has dismissed the case with prejudice, and he'll have to appeal. And if he appeals, what is he supposed to do? If you don't present the data now, and you're not going to present it then what the hell are you appealing for? So that's about it. I think that we're starting to see that the world climate change movement is really, it's just deceptive garbage. And we should, look, I'm a reasonable person. I think a lot of you guys are reasonable people. Maybe not all of you, especially not Larry. But I think we should look at ways to better interact with the environment and make sustainable construction, things that would interfere less with nature around us, and ways to consume less, and ways to prevent poisoning the ecosystem. That's not what climate change activism addresses. It doesn't address it at all. So that's about it. Thanks for joining me. I'll read your guys' names. So it's Willman757, Sislowski, Larry Gerke, Mr. Wazo, Zatoichi's Cane Sword, and I think that was it. Stormy was here earlier. I think she might have left. And Impex. So yeah, I'll talk to you guys later, and have a great evening.